Everybody knows I'm a huge fan of Alejandro Jodorowsky. He has definitely made movies, that you would call like psychedelic, stuff like El Topo, The Holy Mountain. He's never really done a film that you could say fits firmly within a recognizable genre, except for one, this movie Santa Sangre. It's the only one he's made that you could call like, okay, that's a horror movie, or even almost like a giallo film. It is, at least in the second half, is sort of structured like a slasher movie, but in execution, it's pure Jodorowsky. This movie came out in 1989. It was actually Jodorowsky's first movie that he had made in a while. After Dune fell apart in the 70s, he didn't direct for a while. He did do this children's film in India called Tusk, which sort of got buried and has never been seen since. He was approached by the producer Claudio Argento, who was the brother of Dario Argento and had produced a lot of his brother's movies, was sort of wanting to establish his own career. So he got a hold of Jodorowsky and said, I want to produce your next movie, and just gave him carte blanche to do whatever he wanted, make any kind of film he wanted, as long as it was kind of like in that wheelhouse of a sort of bloody, gory, giallo-esque film. I'll give a plot synopsis, but I think if you really want the purity of the experience, you just got to go watch it with no context, like just jump right into it and go on the trip that it takes you on. It's divided into two halves. The first half is a flashback. We see the main character in the opening scene in an asylum. He has become convinced that he is a bird, so we actually see him behaving and living as a bird and eating as a bird. We flash back to his childhood, discover he was raised in the circus. His mother was a tightrope walker. His father was a knife thrower. His mother killed his father, or actually not killed him. She disfigured him with a jar of acid in a very intimate area after catching him cheating on her with a tattooed lady. We jump back to the present day. We see the main character escape from the asylum, rejoin his mother, and she has had her arms severed. Her husband cut off her arms, and she is performing on stage, and she needs her son to act as her arms, creating all of these pantomimes. Once he starts acting as her arms, she begins murdering a succession of young women, and he has to act as her arms in the committing of these murders. So it's a very Freudian horror film, about a son being literally dominated by his mother, and having to act as her arms, in killing all of these women that he finds attractive. I'm sure anybody who hears that description who's never heard of this movie before would just think that sounds like the weirdest, most unpleasant thing ever. It's actually a very beautiful and poetic and moving film. Jodorowsky really fully commits to it. It's a very funny movie in a lot of ways. There's a lot of outrageousness to it and a lot of surrealism to it, but it is also a very sincere drama at the same time. You don't expect to be moved by it, but it is a very moving film in what it says about childhood and lost innocence, and somebody trying to establish their own identity and trying to escape from under the shadow of their parents. There's so many startling images and sequences in it. There's very famously, there's an elephant funeral that is sort of the highlight of the first section. There's an elephant that dies in the circus, and they host a funeral for it. And at the end of the sequence, they toss the carcass into a ravine and people devour the corpse. And I don't know exactly what the symbolism is behind that. Maybe the death of innocence, the main character's innocence. I'm not sure, but it's an unforgettable sequence. It's so weird and disturbing and haunting and oddly beautiful. One of my favorite images, and I could name a lot in this movie, but one of my favorite images that I think speaks to the kind of effect this movie has is a bit in the second half of the movie when the main character sees, a pretty girl, and she gives him a look, and then he hallucinates a boa constrictor coming out of his pants. That one, it's not hard to see the symbolism there, but the fact that that's the way Jodorowsky chooses to represent that moment, and the fact that he doesn't do it with a special effect. He creates this hallucinatory moment with a physical thing with a real boa constrictor that weighs hundreds of pounds, and you see the actor struggling with the sheer weight of it as it's crawling over him, it has an impact that is unlike any other film I could name. And the whole movie is like that, this cross between like this weird sense of realism, because he is dealing with real physical things and animals and sets and locations, but it's in the creation of this dream. It's the kind of film that could only have been made by this specific person. You know, it never would have existed if there hadn't been a Jodorowsky, and there will never be anybody who will make anything like it.
I really need to see it again. It's been many, many years since I watched it. Really only certain images. A lot of the ones that you described are what occupy space in my head. It certainly is a movie full of unforgettable images. I'd like to see it again with more of an now that I have more of an understanding of his work, because when I first saw it, it was prior to having seen any of his other movies, so it was kind of like House, just sort of taking it in for what it was and just being like, oof, that was strange. That was really weird. I think I'd be able to actually enjoy and see some of the other aspects of it now, after your description of it.